What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is the part 5 of a story where Izuku became the Dark Slayer Vergil Successor. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations, and support the amazing author Armored Lord 1115 for writing this story. Now, let's get into part 5. Chapter 13. A Useless Rabbit. The Halia tribe is a tribe of rabbitmen that formerly resided in the Sea of Trees, which was a safe haven for beastmen demi-human, as it is surrounded by an impenetrable fog that makes it impossible to navigate it unless you're a beastman. The Halia tribe are a docile tribe considered as the weakest of all beastmen, and as a few years ago, they were forced to flee the Sea of Trees for the fact that they harbored a person who has the ability to use mana, which as per the custom makes her cursed, and as such, they attempted to execute her. The Halia tribe may be a docile tribe, but they had a sense of unity. It wasn't simply because the person they harbored was the daughter of the head of the Halia tribe, but rather they valued each other, and as such they all willingly left together. As such, the Halia tribe headed to the north, which eventually led to them being discovered by the Hulshire Empire soldiers, who are known for their enslavement of beastmen and discrimination towards them, and were chased all the way to the Risen Gorge. Unfortunately, half of them were captured by the Empire soldiers and definitely transported back to the Empire for them to live a life of being slaves. It was a fate worse than even death itself, but what can they do as the weakest race? Even then, all of them were aware that as the weakest tribe that they would be either killed by one of the monsters that are roaming around or get themselves captured by the Empire soldiers and turned into slaves with no freedom at all, as this was the fate of being in a world where survival of the fittest reigns. Even then, one person among them had refused to yield to such fate. This would be Shay Halia, the daughter of the head of the Halia tribe, and the one who all the misfortune that befell her own tribe was due to her existence. At least this was her honest thoughts. As such, she embarked on a dangerous journey to find her tribe's saviors. 2 months ago, she had managed to learn about her tribe's saviors, who were to appear right on the spot where she was running towards. How does she know this? Well, aside from her ability to manipulate mana, she is also an atavist with a unique skill that allows her to view the future, more so when her own life is in danger, such as now where she is chased by a monster, which is the Dihiter that possessed 2 heads. Luckily, she was able to hide somewhere behind the rocks, while the mindless monster walked past her clearly looking for her. Shay knew she wasn't going to be able to hide forever, and as such, she was a little bit impatient for those 3 to appear and save her and her tribe. Shay is a very attractive and beautiful rabbitman with blue eyes and light blue hair, along with the rabbit ears atop her head, which is unique for her race and clan. She takes pride in her large chest and her gallant figure, which makes her come out as self-centered. She had decided to use any means to convince her saviors to help her, even if it meant using her natural good looks and her exceptionally gifted large chest to seduce them into helping her tribe, since she had managed to identify that among the group was 2 guys. She was aware of how those Empire soldiers had looked at her when she encountered them once. She knew that she was a beauty and she was going to use it to her own advantage. Shay was willing to make the sacrifice for her own tribe. "I'm so tired of waiting. When are they going to appear?" wondered Shay in an impatient voice filled with desperation as well. The tension was quite high for her as she kept peeking every time towards the location she had foreseen in her vision. Her excessive movement along with her rabbit ears that were sticking out was not helping her, especially at the end when she recklessly stuck her head as well as her entire torso to stare, which proved to be a fatal mistake. Thump. Such an ominous sound was heard by Shay's sensitive ear as she turned her head robotically to see the Dihiter who was chasing her as of earlier now staring at her with a drool leaking from his mouth, showing that it was hungry for a rabbitman flesh. Shay squealed loudly, and another chase had happened with the Dihiter with 2 heads chased after her once more. The group of 3 had been successfully transported outside the labyrinth as their view was filled by the crimson light from the magic circle. The air definitely felt different even though nothing could be seen. It's clearly different compared to the air from the depth of the hell. Sensing the fresh air from somewhere, Hajim's cheeks are loosened and Izuku breathed in the fresh air filling his lungs completely and had a satisfied look as they are now back at the surface. View was filled with various emotions, albeit it couldn't be seen on her face, but Izuku could see the twitching of her eyes too, even the movement of her fingers. Even as she unconsciously held onto his hand, showing that she was deeply moved. As their sight adjusted to their surroundings after the red light from the magic circle had died down, they were met with a cave. Hajim looked shocked as opposed to Izuku and you. "Say what?" Hajim spoke without any further thought. Disappointment could be seen clearly on his expression as he looked at the ring and felt that he may have done something wrong. "A secret passage," spoke Yu as she held onto Izuku's hands. Her own expression didn't show much surprise over the situation since this was really expected. "To be hidden as usual," spoke Yu once more as if she was stating a fact that should be considered somewhat of a common sense. Hajim's face had turned red from embarrassment, especially when he saw Izuku blank stare at him. You should know this already. How can you call yourself an otaku? Izuku's eyes said everything as Hajime averted his eyes away, feeling pain from not knowing something so basic. Is that so? It certainly is. There is no way that the direct way to Den of the Rebels wouldn't be hidden, right? Said Hajime quickly to hide his shame at not realizing something so simple as he unconsciously scratched his head. It was already a known fact that the liberators were rebels. A possible secret entrance right at their backyards is not something they would simply ignore. It was a fatal mistake, and those liberators aren't the type who would make such an obvious mistake, especially when they have the entire world on their asses. Nonetheless, Hajime's expression hardened, and without aid from the green light stone, Hajime, Izuku and Yu advanced through the pitch-black cave without any problems. On the way, though there were many doors with seals and traps, the Orcus ring would react, cancelling the activation altogether. The three of them were cautious at first, but soon lost interest as nothing had happened so far and continued to advance, till they finally found light. It's the light from the surface. The light which Hajime and Izuku for the past few months, and Yu for the past 300 years sought for, and now they were seeing the light of freedom. Hajime, Izuku and Yu came to a stop when they saw it, looking at each other, exchanging glances, the three of them grinning, and simultaneously started to run toward the light that they yearned for. As they approached the light, which was gradually getting bigger, they could feel and breathe the air from the surface. It was different from the stagnant air from hell. The air was cool and fresh. Hajime had never felt as much as now how delicious the air was. Thus, Hajime, Izuku and Yu jumped into the light and reached the long-awaited surface. To the humans who live above ground, this place was a hell, an execution ground. Below the cliff, magic could hardly be used. Even so, a lot of powerful and brutal monsters live there. Hajime, Izuku and Yu were currently outside of the cave at the bottom of the Raisin Grand Canyon. Although they were at the bottom of the earth, the sun from above poured down bright and warm light. The fragrance of the surface mixed with the wind was tickling their nose. Compared to any kind of place it could have been, this place was surely the surface. In a daze while looking at the sun above their head, Hajime, Izuku and Yu's facial expressions gradually turned into smiles. Even Yu, who was expressionless by default, could be seen smiling broadly by anyone who had looked at her. We made it, Bak shouted Hajime with both arms raised up in the air for a loud cheer that every monster down there had heard, but he didn't care. Hell yeah, shouted Izuku as well in a cheer. He was moved by such a sight. He didn't care if he attracted attention down there, this was enough to celebrate. Yu also shouted with a smile on her face. Yu, who was known to have an expressionless face and emotionless voice at times, had shown too much emotion on her face, as she was now back at the surface after 300 years of solitude. Yu giggled as she rushed towards Izuku with her arm open for a hug, while Izuku grinned as well, letting out a small chuckle, before the two hugged each other and fell to the ground without any care whatsoever. Their lips met as they made out without any care in the world. The air started to turn pink as if the two had isolated themselves in a separate dimension, as if they were in a world of their own. TSK. Hajime turned his face away from this mushy stuff. He would not admit that he was a little jealous. He too would want a girl he could do this with, but maybe later. Several ugly-looking monsters surrounded the group of three. Izuku and Yu laid on their respective backs, looking very annoyed by how those groups of monsters had rudely interrupted them. Sheesh, how rude can you get? Izuku asked, expressing his annoyance at those monsters that surrounded them, while Yu felt the same. You should have let us enjoy ourselves a little bit longer, said Yu, her voice emotionless, but yet one can tell that she was rightfully angry since they interrupted such a heartfelt moment. Fine by me though. You'll make good target practice for my new gear, said Hajime with a grin, clearly unfazed as he summoned both the Reborn Donner and Schlagen from the treasure trove. Using pursuit skill, Hajime fired 2 bullets which he controlled, and it started to pierce the heads of the monsters at a blinding speed, which resulted in the monsters being killed before they could make sense of what happened. Hajime didn't need to waste as much bullets, nor did he need to reload his revolvers, which made him grin. He no longer regrets following Izuku's training regiment since it yielded results. After all, Izuku has always been about being efficient than being wasteful, and instead of wasting all 12 bullets, he instead only used up to 2 bullets that had done its intended job. Hajime? What's wrong? Asked Yu curiously as she looked at Hajime, who looked at the 2 revolvers with a frown. Izuku understood what was going on because he too felt it. We're in the Raisin Gorge. According to the history books, it used to be an execution ground due to magic being weakened down there, and from Oscar Diary, the Great Raisin Labyrinth should be located somewhere here, said Izuku, clearly remembering the books he read. The kingdom didn't have much information, or rather it was probably classified or covered up, since the events were more than thousands years ago. It was from Oscar's diary that Izuku had learned that the Raisin Gorge belonged to a powerful family of magic users called the Raisin. Those people were believers of Ehud, and as such they executed heretics that the church had ordered to be disposed of for their crimes. The Great Ricin Labyrinth belonged to the leaders of the Liberators, which is ironic considering that the princess of the Ricin had rebelled. The spell is being dispersed, said Yu in a little surprise as she raised a finger and ignited a small fire spell, but it soon dispersed, which proved Izuku to be correct. Yeah, the same thing happened with my lighting field, said Hajime as he had noticed that his bullets were a little bit slower. That was due to the lighting field being weakened. Me and Izuku can take care of any monsters that come our way, so let's go look. Whoa, Hajime, who looked back at Yu, gasped in shock when the fire spell ignited on her finger burst out, and this time it wasn't dispersing. Hajime had imagined that given that Yu was a magic user, that this place would be a total nightmare for her. So he told her to leave everything to him and Izuku, who are physically strong enough to rip a monster in half, even without the use of magic. His way of thinking is logical and filled with common sense. At least, that would be the case if it was some run-in-the-mill magician who needed to use chance and magic circles. Yu on the other hand was the best magic user to the point of being called a genius ever since she was only 10 years old. Fixed it? You just have to use so much mana that it can't get dispersed, said Yu in a calm voice as if she was dealing with some minor nuisance while Hajime was baffled. In such a situation where magic is being dispersed down here, the solution that Yu came up with is to use too much mana that it can't be dispersed. It was common sense. It's like dealing with a large fire that is burning an entire house. Using a bucket of water won't put out the fire, instead it will probably be boiled by the immense heat of the flames, so to deal with it, you would need an even larger amount of water to overpower it. I can see why they call you one of the strongest beings in the world, said Hajime with an exasperated look, but then smiled nonetheless. As expected of our genius magician. Izuku praised her as well as he patted her head, making her close her eyes and smile, while purring like a cat or like a kid who was being praised by their own family. The idea itself sounds easy, but you'd need to have an immense mana pool and good control over it to be able to use it. Many magicians would require a lot of time in order to adjust their magic power, but Yu did it instantly, showing her immense talent in magic. Now then, let's get moving, shall we? Said Hajime as he raised his hand, showing the ring called Treasure Trove, which is an artifact that allows for almost anything to be stored within the gem as its center. Both Izuku and Yu had received one as well, as Izuku had been interested in the treasure trove in order to store Yamato away, and also gave one to Yu, who was pleased to receive another ring from Izuku. Izuku also raised his little finger, showing his own treasure trove. There was also another ring, but this one he received from Yu herself, which he placed in his ring finger, but this one had no special ability as this was just a ring similar to the one he gave her when he proposed to her. Izuku summoned his own motorcycle, which he named as Cavalier. It was a black motorcycle created from a fusion of a normal motorcycle and sections of demonic metal armor that he created using his power. The front resembles a helmet, batwing-like decorative extensions to the side fairing and double-sided serrated blades, extending from the point where the front fork meets the wheel. Izuku had created the motorcycle based on another vision he had when he was thinking of creating a vehicle, upon seeing what Hajime was creating, and that came into his mind, and as such, with the help of Yu, he had created it. Hajime on the other hand brought an American chopper-style motorcycle with a black frame made of Byzantium. As it runs on mana, it's quieter than even an electric car. Speed is also adjusted based on the amount of mana supplied to the engine, so it's even much easier to learn and handle than conventional motorcycles that require shifting gears. I didn't know you created a motorcycle, said Hajime in surprise as he looked at the vehicle with appraising eyes and was impressed since he knew this was a high tier one. I saw you creating Stephen Bryce, so I decided to at least have some form of transportation, but it was still annoying to create it, said Izuku. Admittedly, he had difficulty since he wasn't suited for creation magic. So throughout the 2 months inside the lair, he had created this motorcycle. Hajime on the other hand was on a creation spree. Aside from the vehicle that he had created, he also created his prosthetic arm, his weapons and other things. I've used my demonic power to empower it, so you can say it's somewhat sentient, said Izuku. It was basically like an automated motorcycle that does what he orders, but it can't think for itself. Also during the 2 months, Izuku had told Hajime about what he learned from Yu in regards to Sparda. It surprised him, but at the end Hajime didn't much care, albeit Hajime would often give him the look that says, "You cheat level bastard." Or "You were already broken from the start, who's the cheat level bastard now? We're gonna keep heading east while searching for the labyrinth here. I gotta think there's more towns to be found in the forests to the east, rather than that big desert out west," spoke Hajime using telepathy. "Now that I think about it, there should be a labyrinth in the forest too," said Izuku using telepathy as well as he remembered the notes of Oscar, although not much was said. Oscar notes only mentioned the location of the labyrinth and also stated what ancient magic could be received from conquering them. It didn't surprise him that much when Oscar didn't mention anything about what the trial is about or the requirements to enter it. The whole point of the 7 labyrinths is to test the challengers like them, so giving them information would be really counterproductive, as those labyrinths are supposed to prepare them, or rather prepare those who have the ambition to kill Ahid and his inner circle. Izuku and Harem care less about this world inhabitant, and by extension, you could care less since she had no one else other than Izuku and Harem. Their goal is to return home safely. What happens to the people of this world is of no concern to them. It was selfish of them, considering that there are good people who really did nothing wrong to them, but they were only 16-year-old teenagers. They had family waiting for them back in their own world. It would be one thing if they were given a choice to decide whether they want to fight or not, but technically speaking, they were practically dragged to this world unwillingly and told to fight. The eyes of the Pope that day spoke everything that needed to be said. You have no choice. It's in your best interest to cooperate. You have nowhere to go. If they refuse to fight, they'd probably be slapped with the "you're a heretic" and live a life being chased and shunned away simply because they refused to fight in a way not their own. Seeing how the Liberator's life had ended, it would be a death sentence if you're seen as a heretic. That's a monster's roar. You spoke quietly as she looked back trying to find where the monster roar came from, but it was ahead of them, and she seemed to realize it as she adjusted her side ahead of her. Currently Yu was sitting in front of Izuku merely because he wanted to hug her from behind or kiss the nape of her neck while riding the motorcycle while she rubbed her ass against him. Sounds like it could put up more of a fight than those weaklings from before, said Harem telepathically as he looked before him, seeing the large monster that was chasing someone. The rabbitman? Izuku quizzically asked as given his heightened senses, he was able to clearly see the person being chased by the monster as compared to Harem and Yu who didn't see it. The appearance of Shay became apparent while Harem frowned at seeing the rabbitman that was dressed in such a lewd outfit that only consists of a sleeveless bikini that looks like a swimsuit, which leaves her stomach, midriff as well the upper portion of her breasts exposed. She also wore a miniskirt that is definitely exposing more than it should. I finally found Yao. Please show me, shouted the tearful Shay as she rushed towards their direction without stopping while still being chased. She finally found us. Kind of a strange thing to say, said Yu, clearly confused by this odd behavior. She found it weird how the rabbitman acted like she knew them. This is odd. For some reason I sense mana from her, said Izuku using telepathy to convey what he was sensing, which made Harem frown and shook his own head in denial. Beastmen don't have mana. Seems like getting involved with her would be a pain, said Harem telepathically as well, but Yu also sensed that something was odd as well. What, shouted Shay upon seeing the 2 motorcycles swerving around and heading in the opposite direction of her, which made her panic and begged once more. Please don't abandon me. I'm begging you, shouted Shay once more while Harem looked back at the rabbitman and clicked his own tongue in annoyance. Due to his own interest in female rabbitmen due to their fluffy ears, and surely not because of their scantily dressed clothing that really left nothing for their imagination, made him abruptly stop with the tires screeching on the ground. Bang. The bullet is all it took for Harem to activate his skill pursuit, and the 2 heads were pierced, surprising Shay, who let out a loud squeak before falling on both her knees with both hands on the ground supporting her. It's really dead. You killed the Dihitter with a single shot, Shay said with clear awe in her voice as she saw the 2 heads of the Dihitter that was just spurting blood everywhere. Oh, thank you so much for saving me. Now please, listen to my Shay, who looked like a maiden that had just gotten saved by her knight in shining armor, or rather saved by the demon himself, was trying to launch herself in his arm. Unfortunately for her, she was met ruthlessly with a metallic prosthetic arm of Harem that grabbed her face and started to squeeze her face, making her let out yelps of pain. Who saved who, exactly? Asked Harem menacingly, looking even more like a demon than a prince. Tsundere Harem would never admit out loud that he had just saved her out of the kindness of his heart, especially considering the reason he had saved her was due to his fetish for female rabbitmen. He'd be breaking his own character. There was an enemy in front of me, so I beat it down. That's all. Don't get the wrong idea, said Harem like a typical Tsundere character mixed with an edgelord character. As he let his grip loosened, Shay fell on her back and started rolling left and right while holding her face from the pain of having her face being squeezed this tightly by the prosthetic arm that threatened to crush her skull. Izuku and Yu looked at each other in amusement. The 2 knew full well that Harem had a fetish for female rabbitmen. It was pretty obvious from the way he acted like he didn't care when he actually did care. I don't have time to waste on some rabbit I don't even know. Time to hurry up and get out of here, said Harem loud enough for Shay to hear as he turned away from her. Sorry about that, you two. Let myself get caught with this weirdo, Harem said as he looked at the 2 who were giving him an amusing look, which made him shiver as he realized that they could read him too well. DRNGH. I'm not letting you get away. If you leave now, the future is going to change. said Shay through the tears and some snot that was going down her nose. Future is going to change. Thought Izuku and glanced at Yu, who seemed to have had the same thought as she too had caught on to what Shay had said earlier. Hajime turned towards her, but his eyes fell directly on her rabbit ears that were moving in a hypnotic way that attracted him, but he can't just openly play with her ears without giving himself away. He placed his hand on her head, which made Shay smile, thinking that he had a change of heart only for him to grab both her ears and use his lighting field electrocuting her, which made her go baba. If Hajime's Otaku parents were there, he could already imagine them tearfully kicking Hajime in the gut for doing something like that to a cute fantasy rabbit wearing such a scanty dress. Oh ho. It really does work if you put about 10 times as much power into it, said Hajime, not admitting that he wanted to feel her rabbit ears before he let her go. Well, you never know. If you try and live every day like you'll die tomorrow, I'm sure things'll work out. Good luck and all that, said Hajime nonchalantly as he turned his back once more on her with his mechanical prosthetic arm raised in the air. Ooh, I didn't see anything like this happening in my predictions, said Shay as she nursed her head that just got brutally electrocuted. The fact that she was still standing shows how impressive she is. Prediction. Future prediction or sight, muttered Izuku, just enough for Yu, who was standing next to him, to hear and looked a little bit surprised, but she also came to the same conclusion. An atavist, spoke Yu quietly as the two looked at each other, seeing that they were of the same thought, and smiled at each other, almost bringing the pink world once more. What is your problem? How could you do all that to a drop-dead beautiful girl like me? Shay screamed out loud at Hajime, who just sweat-dropped. So she's self-centered, thought Izuku amusingly. You'd have to be self-centered to just call yourself a drop-dead beautiful girl, especially when in the presence of someone like you. Let's hear a bit of what she has to say, Hajime, said Yu, being curious and wanting to confirm if the rabbitman before them is actually an atavist, while Izuku supported her. I'm also curious to hear what she has to say, said Izuku as well. He too wanted to confirm his own suspicion in regards to why he was sensing mana from her when demi-humans are not supposed to possess mana. Hajime looked at the two with a disbelieving look, but relented. Izuku and Yu didn't do this out of the kindness of their hearts, they were simply curious, but if she proved to be a waste of time, then they would leave her to her fate. They were already being generous in giving her a moment of their time. This is as far as their kindness will go. With that said, Shay resolved herself to explain the situation. This was a moment that will change the course of her tribe's history. Chapter 14. Tragic Past. Arg. Hiyama coughed blood as his back touched the tree bark. He looked up at the perpetrator with fear in his eyes, as he looked like a cornered animal, but compared to the one before him, he was an insect that had no hope of ever defying him. His sword was shattered to pieces and scattered all over the ground. He was far away from the castle, so nobody could save him, having been dragged here by his assailant. An unexpected person that nobody would ever think would do something like this, but 4 people know his nature. Asuke Hiyama was a rotten person to the core. He was a bully who had harassed Hajime and Izuku throughout middle school, albeit Hajime was his main target of bullying due to his subject of interest, Kaori Shirasaki, showing more interest in the good-for-nothing otaku. At the start, he, like all others, was content to admire her from afar when she used to hang around Kaki. He was a coward, and as expected of a bully, he could never do anything to someone like Kaki, who can just beat him up if the situation needed. Even then, Kaki didn't need to physically beat him to put him in his place. If he dared to do anything to Kaki, he was finished. His own social life would be dragged down to the mud, and he'd be an outcast for the rest of his life, which is something he feared above all else, so as someone who knew his place, he just watched from a distance. When Kaori started to get close to Hajime, Hiyama decided to make a bid to make her his woman. Since Hajime was a quirkless nobody, Hiyama doubted anybody would do anything against him, aside from a very select few such as the staff, Shizuku Yagashi and Kaori Shirasaki, among other people. Unfortunately, given their middle school's strict policy over quirk usage and physical bullying, it was obvious that Hiyama can do nothing but hurl insults and demean the two on a daily basis, but while Hajime would give him that awkward look while trying to de-escalate the situation, Izuku was different. Hiyama was intimidated by Izuku, especially when he looked at him with cold eyes as if to tell him, "Is that all you can do?" Hiyama could never intimidate Izuku, but that was due to the difference between him and Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku had seen everything with Bakugo that what he did was considered to be cute. Nonetheless, when they got summoned to this world and were told that they get to be gifted with supernatural power, adding on to their quirks, Hiyama was excited, but for a different reason that is far more sinister and evil. Like he had hoped, Hajime had the synergist vocation with average stats and only 2 skills. He was a loser, and that made Hiyama pleased, but when he turned to Izuku, he was surprised and intimidated when he saw the stats that rivaled their class hero. When Izuku had retaliated and put him and his 2 goons in their place, he had backed away. After all, at the end of the day he was nothing more than a coward. He would not bully someone who has no problem beating him black and blue. He had shifted his attention to Hajime and tried to bully him, despite having received a warning earlier from Izuku, who made it clear that he would also retaliate if Hajime were to ever be harmed. The result was several broken bones that it took several days for him to heal properly. After Izuku and Hajime were removed from the picture during the expedition in the Orcus labyrinth, he was happy, but it didn't take long for Kaori to give him the cold shoulder, and he then started to panic. What if she knew what he did? Or maybe she is just grieving and needs time. Those were the thoughts that ran into his own mind, especially when he had noticed that she was also giving Kaori the cold shoulder, so he assumed that it was just the latter. Even though he thought he could get away with what he did, someone else caught onto what he did, and that would be Eri Nakamura, who proceeded to blackmail him into working for her, which he didn't mind, as long as he got to have Kaori for himself. He was not a loyal person, he'd betray everyone including his classmates, if it meant that he could benefit from it. He would join even the demon side if they can fulfill his goals, and he joined Eri because she would help him have Kaori, as long as he does whatever she commands him to do. Biyama didn't like it, but Eri was far stronger than him, since she had those puppets that she had reanimated. Nonetheless, he had respected her for her devious nature, but despised having to be subservient for her, but swallowed his pride and discomfort. Why are you doing this, Amanagawa-san? Asked Yama as he looked with terror. His body was trembling at the mere sight of the hero, who could easily crush him on the sole of his shoes. Aoki stood unfazed, his blue eyes looking down on him coldly, as if seeing an insect that was not worth his attention, but nonetheless an insect that had just bit more than it should have. Aoki held a regular sword and wore bedroom clothes which consisted of a white shirt and black pants. It was obvious that it was high-quality clothes, unlike what was actually given to the rest of the class, but he was the hero, so he was given the best of what the kingdom has to offer. You're getting too comfortable thinking that you can approach my Kaori so casually like this. Kaori spoke coldly, which had quickly sent shivers down Hiyama's spine as he realized that Kaori was annoyed with him. I don't know what you're Hiyama's attempted to lie through his teeth to be spared from Kaori's displeasure, but his attempt was not appreciated as a foot slammed on his right shoulder casually. Crack. The ominous and terrifying sound of a shoulder being broken could be heard echoing throughout the forest as his arm fell to his side limply. Before Hiyama could scream once more and possibly alert others, the sword that is currently in Kaori's hand had quickly pointed at Hiyama's throat. The threat was so clear, you scream, I will slit your throat. Hiyama tearfully could only nod his head in terror as he bit his own tongue, causing blood to seep from his mouth as he tried to suppress his shout of pain as Kaori lifted his sword and looked at him with a bored expression. Killing you here and now would bring too much suspicion on me, even though it's doubtful that this kingdom would ever do anything to me, since I'm the hero and they need me while you're a nobody. Said Kaori, reminding Hiyama of the difference in level they're playing at. But make no mistake. If I want you dead, then I will kill you here and make sure that nobody will find your remains, since I'd have burned you to ashes by now. Threatened Kaori while Hiyama gulped down his saliva and nodded in fear. So what do you want me to do? Asked Hiyama, stuttering in fear. He was already thinking of selling Eri out to Kaori if it meant that he could be in his good graces. Unfortunately, Eri had used her quirk on him to make sure he would not run his mouth to someone else. It seems that Eri knew of his disloyal nature far too well, and she decided to take precautionary measures to ensure that her pet would not do something unnecessary. Stay out of Kaori and Shizuku's way. They're my childhood friends, and so it's only natural they'd be at my side. Kaori emphasized on the word "my" to the insolent insect before him. His control freak nature was seeping from him, and Hiyama could clearly see it. Oh, okay. Shouted Hiyama, but the sword was pointed once more at his neck. The sharp tip of the metal sword poked his neck, causing blood to leak out as it made Hiyama squeak and use his only arm to cover his mouth. Kaori didn't care much when seeing the blood leaking from Hiyama's throat as he continued to talk, or rather monologue, about his ambition to Hiyama. He was not threatened by Hiyama to hide anything, or rather he was way too stupid to know such a concept. We're going to save this world and become heroes of this world. You and the rest are nothing more than just pawns or supporting characters that make me look good. Don't do anything unnecessary. Said Kaori while Hiyama nodded fearfully as Kaori pulled the sword away. Every great hero out there has to have his own heroine by his own side, and as they are my childhood friends, it's only natural that they would become the heroine of my story. Said Kaori as if he was speaking a fact while Hiyama nodded his head. I understand. Squeaked Hiyama as he nodded his own head a little bit too much, but Kaori had paid him no mind as he looked at the moon that is beautifully set in the sky. Every great hero in every story grows through a development phase. Such as losing a comrade along the way, but all of this is just a setup for the hero to reach new heights. Said Kaori in a very passionate voice while Hiyama's face grew even more in fear. That means that you and the others are there to make me look good. To help advance the plot of my own story. I will become a great hero even more than my own grandfather," said Kaki, revealing his ambition as he looked at him darkly. "He's nuts," thought Hayama in clear terror. Kaki was way off the mark, he had just twisted everything that a hero is supposed to embody. What terrified Hayama the most is the level of delusion that is being spouted out of Kaki's mouth. Kaki was treating this as a fantasy world where everything bends down to his every whim, since he was naturally the hero of this world. To Kaki, sacrificing others was not really wrong since he is the hero, so they're obligated to do so to advance the plot of his story and make him gain more power and grow. To Kaki, only a villain would go after the hero's women. In that case, Kaki had labeled Hayama as a villain who is trying to make a grab at one of the heroines of his story, and as such, he is putting him in his place. To Kaki, his classmates should be happy that they're just another stepping stone to him. After all, in all the story, whenever a comrade sacrifices their life for the hero to advance, they're all smiling while saying something cliched like "defeat the demon king for me, hero-sama." This is how it should go, but people like Izuku, Hajime, Hayama including a few others, are ruining his perfect image of how his story should go. His mood was bad considering that as of recently, both Kaori as well as Shizuku are rebelling against him, but patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. "So let's stick to our roles, Hayama-kun," said Kaki with a cheerful smile, but after seeing the other side of Kaki, the cheerful smile looked far more sinister than anything else. Pulling him up, Kaki placed Hayama's arm over his shoulder and started talking normally, as if they were good friends who had a good spar. Hayama was even more terrified as he chuckled nervously to not get killed. "What did I just see? I'm so dead," thought a person with a very thin shadow and lack of presence who peeked from the tree with terror. This was Kasu Kendo, who had just come here to relax his nerves but ended up stumbling into something he shouldn't have seen. For once, he was glad to have a thin shadow as he contemplated what to do. "Now then, allow me to tell you my story," spoke Shay, who was still in the ground but was looking at the group of 3 individuals who were going to save her tribe. My tribe, the Halia tribe, had lived deep inside the beastman country of Vergil, within the Sea of Trees. But because of me, my tribe is constantly being pursued, spoke Shay as she recounted her story. Usually, beastmen possess no kind of mana whatsoever. I was an exception, however, and can even manipulate that mana directly. On top of that, I have the specialized magic, Future Sight. It's an ability that allows me to see the potential outcomes from making certain choices. Shay revealed, much to Hajime's surprise. Izuku and Yu weren't as surprised as Hajime as they looked at each other, realizing that they were right on the money. The female rabbitman not only can manipulate mana like a monster, but she is also an atavist, something that is unheard of. Unfortunately, this means I have a power normally held only by monsters. If I were captured, there's no doubt I would be executed. My tribe left the forest behind, on an exodus to the mountains in the north, said Shay with a serious look, recounting the events. Can't blame them, thought Izuku to himself. He didn't blame the beastmen in the forest for trying to execute Shay as they did, and especially how they reacted to the weakest tribe defying them. Even if you were to ignore the fact that a beastman happens to possess mana and can also manipulate it like the monsters and is also an atavist. If both the church and the demon heard about this, they'd have both sides knocking on their doorsteps. The church would either try to turn Shay into their own side for the war, or the demons will try to do it. There is also the likely chance that both sides might feel threatened that the beastman might end up starting to develop mana and would join the war, causing a 3-way war. Besides, a beastman possibly developing mana goes against the doctrine of the church and for the demons. After all, if there is anything that both humans and demons share in common is their beliefs that the beastmen are a lower race who were forsaken by the gods. In that regard, having both the humans and demons knocking on their own forest doorstep was dangerous. Not even the fog will keep them safe, since there is a likely chance that the humans and the demons can nullify the fog, and as such they'd be slaughtered by both sides. We were discovered by Imperial soldiers. The people of the Halia tribe are not suited for fighting. Before we realized it, more than half of us had been captured, said Shay as she painfully recounted the Imperial soldiers' faces as they captured more than half of them. Pathetic, thought Izuku to himself. He had read about the other races and tribes in this world, including from Oscar Journal, so he found her and her tribe to be pitiful and pathetic. Shay was just justifying why more than half of her brethren were captured and enslaved against their own will, as them simply being unsuited for fighting, which he honestly found to be pathetic. It was just a plain old excuse to justify one's weakness and inability to do what they could do if they had at least put some effort. I can't do this because of that. The enemy is strong, so I can't do it. It can't be helped. Etc. To Izuku, the rabbitmen have a talent in presence manipulation. If they had used this to their own advantage, they could have easily escaped the clutches of the Imperial soldiers back then. If they decided to fight back, they could be a tribe of assassins or shinobi. So much wasted potential, thought Izuku. The Hylia tribe could be the most dangerous tribe, especially when they're in their own territory, given that only beastmen can navigate the fog. To avoid complete annihilation, we fled to this gorge, where magic couldn't be used. But that's when we were attacked by monsters, said Shay before she placed a hand on her chest and pleaded. Please, you have to help. Save us. Please, help save my tribe, begged Shay in a pleading voice that would make anyone sympathize with her and agree to help, especially when it's a beautiful woman such as herself who is making such a request. Hell no, Harem shouted with no hesitation whatsoever as he sneered at Shay, who looked shocked, having not expected such an immediate answer. She had expected him to agree or at the very least hesitate. And now wait just a minute. No matter how you look at it, this is where you go, shouted Shay as she made a cool pose with her hand, as if trying to imitate what she expected his answer to be. Right, that's totally how this is supposed to go. I saw you three protect us with my future sight, shouted Shay as she directed her look the most at Izuku and Harem. Simmer down. That's enough of your fooling around. What do we get out of saving your family anyways? Asked Harem in a clearly annoyed tone while Shay hesitated. You're being pursued by the Empire and your old kingdom. How'd things even end up like this if you've got the future sight or whatever? Asked Harem while Shay couldn't answer him. He's right. Izuku spoke for the first time, who was mostly content to watch the event from afar and determine when to interject in the conversation. Shay had turned to look at him. A sob story like this may move the heart of someone else, but there is nothing to gain from this. If anything, it'd be troublesome if we got involved, said Izuku while Shay looked down. Our group has goals, and we can't just attract attention to us from the Empire and from those other beastmen in the Sea of Trees this early on. This will also naturally cause rumors to go around which would attract the attention of other kingdoms like the Hylia, said Izuku. His words were logical. In order to help your tribe, there should be a suitable compensation for the trouble we're going to be involved in. You can't just run towards us and throw yourself at us while begging us to save your tribe. Izuku admonished her even further. The world doesn't work like that. Where me and Harem come from, there is this quote of our time is valuable, so what do you plan to offer for our time? Asked Izuku while Shay went quiet. It's just like you said. As long as we try hard enough, the future is something we have the power to change. I believe that much at the very least, said Shay as she clenched her fist remembering bitter memories. But there was a future I wasn't able to change because I didn't try hard enough. But this time, I don't want to give up on the future where you three are with me, said Shay with resolve in her eyes to fight for the ideal future. I respect her resolve, but did she ignore what I said earlier? Thought Izuku in his head. What he was doing was cruel and selfish because he was refusing to help someone in need of help. He was sure his old heroic side would have admonished himself harshly. Still, when he was a quirkless nobody and bullied on a daily basis by his former childhood friend turned bully, nobody stepped up and tried to put a stop to this behavior. Instead, people watched as he was just humiliated and harassed on a daily basis. When the teacher exposed him in front of the class to humiliate him, nobody talked about how unprofessional the teacher was that day. When his grades were sabotaged, nobody talked about how unfair it was for him who had just worked hard to get a good grade. When people looked down on him because he was just quirkless, nobody did anything. Society still remained the same, treating him and the others like him as trash, and it was unfair. Life is hard. Life is not fair. The world has always been about survival of the fittest. Even back in Japan. You show weakness, you'd be swallowed whole by others who could care less about your feelings or even your circumstances. He trained hard, he studied hard, he rebelled against the corrupt system of the government. He was strong and not weak enough to fall under the pressure of other people. Why couldn't the Hylia tribe do the same? Even someone with a disability can do things that even someone without a disability can't do. As long as you're willing to use the available tools before you to grow, then everything should be possible. Izuku used every opportunity and every tool before him to grow strong, such as training regularly every day, taking Shizuku offer, and joining the Yagashi dojo, etc. Izuku, let's take her with us, said Yu loud enough for the two to hear her as Izuku looked at her curiously, while Harem raised an eyebrow. What? Do you really mean it? Thank you so Shay, who tried to hug Yu by jumping at her with open arms, was met with a fire spell at point blank to her face, which made Shay roll on the ground. And why are we letting her tag along, exactly? Asked Harem with both his arms crossed to his chest as he looked at Yu with a serious look. We'll need a guide to get us through the Sea of Trees. She's lived there before, so she's perfect, said Yu, intending to use Shay to head to the labyrinth in the Sea of Trees. You've got a point there, said Harem with a small sigh as he realized that Yu's words were true as he looked at Shay, while Izuku let out a tired sigh. I guess having a guide would be better. Having her tribe indebted to us would do us good, even if they are good for nothing Hylia who are more trouble than they are worth, said Izuku as he rubbed the back of his head. Yu smiled. She knew he only agreed with her because he respected her own opinion as she held his hand and smiled at him and at Hajime as well as she conveyed the next words. "And it's alright. We're the strongest there is," said Yu with a thumbs up, with her being the strongest magician out there, Izuku being a descendant of Sparda and Hajime being a hybrid monster. "Well, if you say so, then," said Hajime as he looked away with a sigh, but he was convinced by her words and agreed to concede and help the Hylia tribe, but in exchange that they be their guide. "Rejoice, Rabbit. We're going to hire you to be our guide through the forest," said Hajime as he walked towards his motorcycle and turned to look at Shay, whose face and hair were burned as he extended a hand to her. "Your payment is us having saved your life. No complaints about that, I assume?" asked Hajime as he got on the motorcycle and looked at her. "Oh, of course not," shouted Shay as she stood up with tears at the corner of her eyes from having her pretty face and hair burned by this evil blonde woman that was you. "Good, now. Hop on," said Hajime as he got the motorcycle working and his prosthetic arm still extended towards Shay, offering her to get behind him as it was the only available seat. "I'm Nagumo Hajime." Hajime was quick to introduce himself to Shay as he looked ahead of him with a smirk. "It's you," said Yu, who was sitting in front of Izuku secretly rubbing herself against Izuku, who grinned at her and kissed the nape of her neck, which she enjoyed. "I'm Midoriya Sparda Izuku, remember that bunny girl?" said Izuku with a smirk as he too got the motorcycle cavalier working for him as they all looked at Shay waiting for her response. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Shay Hylia." Shay introduced herself with a lot of enthusiasm, with tears at the corner of her eyes and a smile on her face from clear happiness. Chapter 15. Hylia Tribe. A few months had passed since Hajime and Izuku fell in the deepest pits of the abyss after a somewhat unexpected betrayal from the group hero, but then again, those who knew Katsuki well enough had realized that it was intentional from the hero part, who despised the two. One person had accidentally learned about the class hero's true nature after he tried to take a stroll at night to clear his mind from all the stress that he had gone through from Hajime and Izuku being dead. He was confused and lost, not knowing what to do. Should he tell someone about what he saw? Or should he stay quiet? Those thoughts ran in his head, but then who would believe him? It's hard to believe that Katsuki was this type of person. It also made Katsuki think that the death of Izuku and Hajime was not a mere accident. Like every student, Endo had a favorable opinion of Katsuki in the past. The guy was everything he had wanted to be, at least that's what he wanted at the start when he first saw Katsuki. Katsuki was academically smart, being at the top of the class. He also took part in school activities and even trained in the Yagashi dojo from when he was a child, making him build like an athlete. Katsuki also took part in national events and championships where he won and was placed in the magazine. He has an air and charisma that makes people attracted to him. Very rarely do people not get attracted to him, such as Shizuku and Kaori, who were his own childhood friends, and as such, they were used to his antics and know him too well compared to them. There was no shadow of a doubt that Katsuki was destined for greatness. Even some of the pro heroes who recognized him when he would walk on the street would send him praises and even encourage him to later join their agency as a possible sidekick. Even then, Katsuki didn't look like a sidekick material. He looked like someone who would build his own agency and become his own leader. This was the impression that Katsuki had of him, since Katsuki was strong and had a very good quirk. Katsuki excelled at everything, even at things that are relatively new to him, as long as he put his mind into it. It made Katsuki envious because he wishes he had 1/4 of that talent to be able to do anything with just a little effort when he and others had to bust their asses. Aside from Katsuki talent, he's also good at socializing with others regardless of their gender. His air and charisma along with his speech make people unable to resist him. Katsuki is the only person who would get away with calling a girl by her first name. If he were to do something like this, he'd be met with a sneer and something along the line of, "Who do you think you are to call me by my first name? You. Who are you?" But Katsuki doing it was different, since it would usually send said girls on cloud 9 from the happiness of being acknowledged. If there is anything that Katsuki had learned throughout the years of living on Earth, is that you should never defy those like Katsuki. People like Katsuki are the type of people who sit at the top of the world. The last person who had made Katsuki as an enemy got executed, not in that sense that their head got chopped off and rolled on the ground, but rather they got executed socially. Katsuki's fan club consisted largely of women who were in love with him, had just taken to making that insolent person an outcast, not only in their own middle school, but outside their school as well. The last Katsuki heard of that guy was how he had almost suicided one day, but was saved by his parents. Some rumors had said that the guy had moved countries not only due to being outcast in their middle school, but also outside their middle school. The fact that a person was forced to move countries shows how popular Katsuki was to get people to react the way they did. Now, Katsuki is the hero of Tortus due to his vocation. It was obvious that the kingdom would value him more than someone like him. If he defied him, what would happen to him? His paranoia had made him imagine various scenarios. Kauki could possibly dispose of him just like he almost did with Hiyama. The others in the class would outcast him for doing something heinous, such as accuse someone like Kauki. The possibility was endless and none of them were good at all. Kasuke. A voice interrupted his thoughts as he looked behind him to see Meld Logan standing with his arm crossed and wearing casual clothes that weren't his armor. Big brother. Kasuke blurted out in surprise, while Meld smiled a little at the title that the boy had given him, which he gratefully accepted since he didn't want to be only as their instructor. "What are you doing this late at night?" asked Meld curiously. He had noticed that Kasuke looked bothered, especially the way he looked in fear towards Kauki, and knew something happened. Is Kasuke going to be the next sacrifice? Thought Meld with a small frown on his face. The kid had grown on him and he looked at him as a little brother, so he didn't want to see Kasuke die. "I just wanted to take a stroll to relax my nerves." Kasuke stuttered nervously as he let out a small chuckle at the end to ease the atmosphere, but he was not being honest. "Is it about Kauki?" asked Meld, not beating around the bush while Kasuke looked at him with surprise and a little bit of worry that he was that easy to read. "Yes," said Kasuke meekly. He decided to trust his instincts and tell Meld about what he learned. Maybe, just maybe something can be done. "What exactly happened?" asked Meld with a frown, and Kasuke hesitated, which Meld noticed before he pulled out a bead from his pocket, which is a special artifact, and broke it on the ground, which caused a barrier to appear that blocks sound. "This is a barrier artifact that blocks sound from leaving it. You can talk without any fear," said Meld, while Kasuke felt more at ease when hearing that, and before long he started to explain. Even with the barrier blocking the sound, Kasuke's paranoia was still there, as he would still at times occasionally glanced at his own surroundings, as if to see if there was anyone who was watching them, but luckily there wasn't any person around at that time. By the end of his explanation, Kasuke was breathing hard, looking like he had just run a long marathon, while Meld looked shocked by what he had heard, or should have really expected this to be the case. His hand clenched hard to the point that it turned white and blood almost started to come out. "How much is he going to fall even further?" spoke Meld with a disappointed tone, and yet there was anger. He didn't particularly like Hiyama, but if Kauki is willing to do this to his classmates, then the others are not going to be spared. "Why, you believe me?" asked Kasuke curiously but also in worry. A story like this would make anyone think he's insane. Making accusations at the hero would be dangerous. "Yes. You may not know this, but me, Yagashi and Shirasaki have learned about the hero's dark side. We've witnessed him push both Midoriya and Nagumo down in the abyss," said Meld with a saddened look, which shocked Kasuke. This was a confirmation that his earlier suspicion was right. Kauki was behind the death of both Izuku and Hajime. Meld opened his eyes to look at Kasuke, hesitating to say the next words, but Kasuke deserves to know the truth. "The kingdom are already aware about his treachery because I've told them, hoping they'd do something about it, but they hardly care. To them, as long as the hero-sama is pleased and as well, then it matters not how many sacrifices need to be made," said Meld with shame in his voice. Kasuke felt a pit in his stomach when he heard that. As he lowered his head in fear, his body was trembling. He didn't like this, but what can he do? "You and your other classmates are in danger. It doesn't seem like the church intends to fulfill their promise at all. I'm sorry. I truly am sorry that you have such an incompetent older brother." Meld apologized deeply from the bottom of his heart as he lowered his head, almost touching the ground. Please raise your head, big brother. I don't blame you," said Kasuke frantically as he tried to get Meld to raise his head. Kasuke does not blame him in the slightest. "I honestly don't know what to do. I'm ordered to just train you kids to prepare for the war. I'm mostly told to focus the most on Amanagawa since he is the one with the hero vocation," said Meld while Kasuke didn't blame him. "So what next?" asked Kasuke. He was lost and confused on what to do at this point in life. He was basically told that nothing can be done at this point. "You get stronger. Right now, you can't trust the kingdom to honor their own promise they made at the start. I will talk with Yagashi about it. You should stick with her and Shirasaki as well," said Meld while Kasuke looked hesitant. But what about Amanagawa? You've heard what he almost did to Hiyama a few weeks back. If I get close to those two, he might try to get rid of me," said Kasuke fearfully. "We can get around this problem. During the training practice, I could pair you with them while using the excuse of a group practice," said Meld while Endu had gone quiet. Kauki won't do anything since he will view this as just a training practice and not Endu making a move at his heroines. He did what he did with Hiyama because the latter was actively seeking her out and anyone could tell that he was interested in her as a woman. Endu doesn't have such feelings towards the two women, or rather he knows that he stands no chance with them. They were the two popular girls in their own middle school, while he was just a guy who is easily forgotten, and even if he were to stand in between them, they wouldn't notice him. Besides, a group practice could help ease the tension a little. Right now, the hero team is breaking apart very rapidly, and the nobles and royals are just noticing it. The two girls refuse to talk to Kaki with Shizuku, letting Kaki do whatever he wants, probably hoping a monster would kill him for her, and she also ignores him. Kaori on the other hand ignored Kaki every chance she got and made any excuses to get away from him. Whenever she heals him, given that she is forced to do so, she would do it in a half-ass way, or if she could make Kaki feel pain while healing him, then she would jump at the opportunity to inflict pain on him. In case things become bad, the three would have each other back. Katsuki needed to up his training, and Meld was going to make sure that he would grow strong fast to fight for himself. The future looks bleak right now, Katsuki. I need you to become a man for me and grow strong. Now that you know about Amanagawa, you're going to be a target, so you need to change in order to survive," said Meld while Endu looked at him with teary eyes. You understand, brother," said Katsuki as he wiped his tears and gained a motivated look to train hard and grow strong. "So that means you three can manipulate mana directly, and you can use specialized magic?" asked Shay in clear surprise at that, as it was a very rare thing. "Yup, that's the gist of it. This vehicle and my weapons are all something akin to artifacts," explained Hajime as he drove Steve towards the direction where the other Hully are located. "So that means we're..." Shay opened her mouth, realizing that the four of them were actually very much alike, and as if predicting this, Hajime had confirmed. "Us four are all similar in how we have the same power as monsters, yeah," said Hajime while tears welled up at the corner of Shay's eyes as she had heard the confirmation. "I see. So that's how it is." Shay sniffled her tears, which Izuku, who was driving, noticed along with Yu as they looked at her in confusion. "Hajime, the rabbit is crying," said Yu herself as she looked at the rabbit with an exasperated look, while Izuku understood a little. "What's with you all of a sudden?" asked Hajime with an exasperated look as he finally noticed that she was crying while covering her own face with both her hands. "I'm sorry. I'm just so happy to find out that I'm not alone," said Shay, expressing her true feelings, having been surrounded by people who can't use mana, not only that she was ostracized by the other beastmen for it. You looked at Shay with a blank look, but one can see the look in her eyes that felt complicated. Izuku can easily guess what was going on in her mind. You probably felt some connection to Shay. "To find out that I'm not alone." That line made by Shay was probably what triggered you a little. For you, who was sealed in the labyrinth for 300 years, she was happy that she was no longer alone, as she had Izuku and Hajime. For you, her entire race is dead, making her possibly the last of her kind. Her kingdom is also destroyed as a result because no one is there to manage it. This left her alone and without any purpose, but ever since Izuku entered her life and she felt that there was a meaning to her being alive. Izuku was like her. Izuku had the accelerated healing that functions like her own automatic regeneration, making the two of them immortal. She also got to have her dream come true in the form of being saved by a descendant of Sparda. So even though she still felt the effects of being abandoned and betrayed by her uncle and her subjects, she felt that as long as Izuku was with her, then she didn't need anything else in this world. Smooch. Izuku, who had seen the look on her face, had placed a kiss on the nape of her neck and pulled her back closer to him. Yu blushed as she looked at him in surprise. "You're not alone. We will return home together no matter what," said Izuku in a softer tone as Yu heard this and gulped hard, trying her best to control her emotion, since if she didn't she might cry a little from happiness. It was not fair. Despite the fact that she was expressionless at times, Izuku could easily read her just by a glance. He knew how she was feeling and was quick to comfort her and assure her for a better future together. "You're my wife now. I'd like to marry you properly once we return to Japan together in a ceremony. After 2 to 3 years after we return, I'd like to have a family with you," Izuku whispered in her ears. Ringed in Yu's head as her eyes turned into hearts. This meant that Izuku had no issues with having a family with her, and she already started to daydream. In Yu's mind, she was imagining herself cradling a baby in her arms who has white hair and crimson red eyes. She was imagining Izuku hugging her from behind as he looked over their baby with a smile on his face. "I want Izuku's babies. I want his 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 babies," thought Yu in her head as she kept repeating it in her head like a broken record, looking like she had already lost her mind, and she started to wiggle her butt against his crotch. Hajime-san, can you also comfort me?" asked Shay as she saw the interaction between Izuku and Yu, as with her rabbit ears, she was able to somewhat hear their conversation. This naturally made her jealous, and she looked at Hajime expectantly, since after seeing her cry like this, he was supposed to say something like what his friend said, such as that kind of thing. "Why should I do something so troublesome, you useless rabbit?" Hajime said in a tyrannical voice as he had just cruelly dismissed a beautiful maiden like her who needed comfort. When he and Izuku were deep in the abyss fighting for their lives, none of them were trying to comfort each other, since what they needed wasn't that type of comfort, instead they wanted to survive. Their own version of comforting each other was them pissing each other off. It gave them a sense of normalcy which they both had just desperately needed to cling on what is left of their humanity. It also took their mind off the fact that they got betrayed. Not to mention, they were men. It was a line made by the great elfman from Fairy Tale. Of course, it didn't mean they couldn't cry, but in a situation where their own lives are at stake, just sitting at a corner and just crying while blaming others for their misfortune would not solve anything, as it would be a waste of time. For Harem and even Izuku, waiting for others to comfort you is a waste of time and is useless. The two of them had cried in the past when they were labeled as quirkless by society and when they both got bullied and shunned, but they had already run out of tears. Expecting others to comfort you or do things for you is not going to change anything. It only makes you weak because you depend on others to give you those pills that are comforting, but it's only temporary. For them, the only thing they can do is to struggle in this life and work hard to change their situation. "Boy Harem, are you sure you're not a descendant of Shikamaru Nara?" said Izuku in a mocking voice while Harem, like a typical Yakuza, flipped him the bird. Suddenly a horde of monsters can be seen in front of them. Those were the Hyveria, which are a giant winged monster that is similar in appearance to a wyvern. 5 of them can be spotted flying in the air. That horde of monsters. Harem. That might be. Shay, who was about to complain earlier after Harem's rude answer, had become alarmed at the sight of those monsters that hunted her own tribe from the air. "I know. Settle down. I'm flooring it, so you better hold on tight," said Harem, clearly unbothered by the sight of those flying monsters, as they were simply just a group of small fry. The Halia tribe were panicking as they started to run like headless chickens, trying to run behind rocks to hide from those monsters that were flying down to eat them. One particular female Halia took to covering for her child with her body as a Hyveria rushed towards them with the intention to eat them both at the same time. Blam. The bullet had quickly pierced the head of the Hyveria, which had surprised the Halia mother, who looked back to see the Hyveria dead on the ground with its head bleeding. This naturally confused the rest of the tribe of useless rabbits as they looked around and saw the 2 approaching vehicles, which scared them as they had assumed that this was another new type of monster. "Hey everyone. I found us some help," shouted Shay, unaware that her large breast was pressed at the top of Harem's head, who gave her the stink eyes as her breast was getting in the way. "Shay." The rest of the Halia tribe shouted in happiness upon seeing the girl riding this monster, which they assumed that she had either tamed it or the guy in front of her had tamed a monster and was using it for transportation. Blam. Izuku pulled Ebony, which is a semi-automatic pistol, from his own treasure trove as he pointed the muzzle of the pistol at one of the Hyveria that is afar and shot it with a bullet that is instilled with his demonic power. Ebony is a left-handed black gun that has been modified for long-distance targeting and comfort, while the right-handed white gun, Ivory, was custom-built for rapid firing and fast draw times. "The hell," shouted Harem as he looked at Izuku, who smirked at him while holding the black gun in his left hand and flipped him the bird. Ebony and Ivory were pistols that he saw in one of his dreams where his own ancestor Dante was using it. He had also learned how to wield them the same way as Dante had done, so he's good at it. "Anything you can do, I could do it even better," said Izuku tauntingly, which triggered Harem enough to take this as a challenge as he found Shay breast bounce on his head, which added onto his ire. "If you're feeling well enough to get in the way, I'd better make you work," said Harem as with veins in his head, he grabbed the top of her head. "Work?" asked Shay in confusion, unaware that she was going to be used as a bait for the Hyveria so that Harem can win this competition and prove that he is still better at this than Izuku. "What? It'll be easy. I'm just gonna ask you to be bait for these hungry monsters. Go get him, you worthless rabbit," shouted Harem as he tossed Shay towards the hungry Hyveria. "No!" shouted Shay in panic as she found herself fast approaching towards the swarm of Hyveria that noticed her and approached her to eat her while she was floating in the air. "I will prove to you why I'm the best at this, you bastard," shouted Harem towards Izuku as the latter smirked at him and the two started firing bullets at the Hyveria that was approaching Shay. By the end of this, Harem did win, not surprising, since the guy had pursuit skills, so technically speaking, gunning and the likes were his area of expertise, unlike Izuku, whose area of expertise is swordsmanship. "TSK. Your pursuit skill is what saved you," said Izuku while clicking his tongue, but he expected it while Harem stuck his tongue out like some child while also flipping the bird. "Harem, you cheater," you said in a monotone voice. She had managed to notice that Harem used his pursuit skill to shoot others' bullets to intercept Izuku's bullet. "Everything is legal as long as you don't get caught," was both Izuku and Harem's motto, so it was no surprise that Harem would do something so evil and underhanded, like sending bullets to intercept Izuku's own just to win. If someone with proper common sense heard this, they'd have their san value shaved off. In the first place, you shouldn't be doing something illegal, but the two didn't care about something so stupid and meaningless. The two motorcycles stylishly swerved before the Halia tribe that looked like their soul had come out of their mouth when seeing Shay being thrown like this, especially her father Cam, who almost had a heart attack. Harem held his metallic prosthetic left arm out as Shay comically fell head first on his palm as he grabbed her before she could impact the ground and turn into bloody paste. At the same time, the dead Hyveria started raining from the sky as the green lush field that was the forest started to get dyed with the orange blood of the Hyveria that were killed. "I can't take this anymore. You're being so rough with me," said Shay with tears forming in the corner of her eyes and comical eyes, but Harem could care less about her complaints and instead tossed her to the ground. "Can I ask for gentler treatment?" asked Shay with her eyes swirling from the shock and dizziness she had gone through. It was truly a traumatizing event after having been used as a monster bait. After things calmed down enough and the situation was explained through the troublesome Shay Halia, the leader of the Halia tribe who is also the father of Shay, had stepped forward with his head lowered in a bow. The other Halia tribe also were present but standing a few feet behind their leader as they looked at the group of humans anxiously not knowing whether they would be attacked and turned into slaves or were they actually going to be saved. Regardless, given their awareness of Shay's particular atavist power of being able to see into the future, they trusted her to make the right decision. Really, if anything, they all felt touched by the fact that she would risk her life for their own sake. "You would be Master Harem and Master Izuku, I presume. I am Shay's father, Cam Halia, and the chieftain of the Halia tribe." Cam introduced himself to the two gentlemen before him. Cam is a middle-aged man with squinted eyes, short-cut dark blue hair and a beard. He has a fairly skinny build. As a rabbitman, Cam has rabbit ears atop her head. "You have my deepest gratitude for saving our tribe," said Cam as he bowed his head once more towards Harem and Izuku. "Gratitude noted. But don't forget about our deal to guide us through the sea of trees, got it?" Harem's voice came out as a warning to them that this wasn't a charity they were doing. "We will protect you and your tribe throughout the journey as per the deal, so if there is anything worth mentioning, it's better to cough it up so we wouldn't be surprised," said Izuku as well while they nodded their heads. "Monsters will swarm all over us in no time if we stick around here. We're getting out of here for now," said Harem while they nodded their heads once more in understanding. "That's it guys. Thanks for watching and supporting us. See you in the next part."